I låter nimmer fi. Vägen libile von euch hat neu zu ribe girly. May the words of my mouth and the thoughts of my heart be acceptable before your God, my rock and my redeemer. Welcome to Haftarah for the double portion of Parshat Matot-Masei. We are reading from the book of Jeremiah. We are currently situated within the 3 weeks of mourning. The prophet is delivering a direct criticism regarding the conduct of the Jewish people. He is conducting an operational audit, evaluating a nation that has lost its strategic goal. He asks a clear question on behalf of the Creator. He states, what wrong did your fathers find in me, that they went far from me? The text continues, and the prophet identifies the specific nature of their failure. He points out that they pursued hevel, worthlessness. They pursued this by chasing a concept that lacks substance. They absorbed that same emptiness into their own operations. They neglected the historical process that had established them. They arrived in a productive environment, Eretz Israel, and they failed to understand the mechanics of physical wealth. To comprehend the mechanical error described by the prophet, we must first look at the Parsha, the reading of Masei. It lists 42 separate journeys. It documents precisely where the people camped and where they traveled through the unyielding, barren environment of the desert. On a superficial level, this reads like a historical travel log, a record of difficult migration. However, in the upper worlds, these 42 stops are not arbitrary coordinates on a map. They represent a targeted, systematic operation. To grasp this process, we turn to the Kabbalah mechanics. We must examine the foundational concept of Klipat Noga, the intermediate shell, and Berur, extraction or separation. This describes the intermediate layer of reality that is neither purely holy nor completely unholy, but a mixture of both. Most of our physical world exists here, in this Klipat Noga. Human action determines whether the spiritual remnants trapped in this neutral layer are elevated to holiness or dragged down into unholiness or impurity. We need to translate this into plain, practical terms to understand how it governs our daily operations. The universe is not cleanly divided into good and evil. There exists a broad intermediate zone. This zone is the neutral shell, the Klipat Noga. It contains spiritual energy, but that energy is surrounded by an exterior. Almost everything in our professional environment and equally within our personal domestic lives, exists within this specific layer. Capital, real estate, corporate influence, technology, and even the comfort of our own living rooms are all neutral. They possess no inherent moral direction. They are raw materials, and the purpose of the human being operating in the physical world, at work and within the walls of their own home, is to perform the active, demanding work of bero, of separation. When you take a neutral asset, whether it is a corporate portfolio or a private time you spend with your family, and you deploy it for productive, elevated purpose, you break the exterior of the shell, you uplift the trapped spiritual energy, and you integrate it into the system of holiness. You upgrade the fabric of reality. Controversially, if you utilize that same asset purely for ego or to generate unnecessary friction, you fail to perform this uplift. The dense gravity of this shell remains intact, and it eventually drags the operator down into inefficiency and impurity. This mechanic was the objective of the 42 journeys. The Creator directed the nation into specific hostile travel points because spiritual energy resided in those exact locations. They mined, quote unquote, the environment for its hidden holiness. The issue arose when they crossed the border. They entered the land of Israel. Here, the prophet Jeremiah delivers his critique. He says, "Ve'ovi eschem el eretz hakarmel, le'echol pirio v'tuvo v'tavoyu v'titmu es arzi." And I brought you into the plentiful country to eat its fruit and its goodness. But when you entered, you defiled my land. We must ask, why had operation failed in a plentiful country when it succeeded in a barren desert? A fertile economy, a highly profitable business sector, or simply a comfortable, secure domestic routine serves as the ultimate testing ground for this klipat noga, the intermediate shell. In the desert, the challenge is clear. The lack of resources forces focus and the need for divine backing. And therefore it is obvious that only the one above can help, and the source is clear. However, in a plentiful land, the illusion of independence takes root. The physical world is abundant. The operators looked at the agricultural yields and the economic prosperity, and they assumed the wealth itself was the objective. They stopped elevating the physical assets to the higher purpose. They became distracted by the neutral layer, by this klipat noga. When you chase a neutral asset without the intention of elevating it, you become absorbed by the material, because the material itself lacks inherent life force. It becomes a burden. The spiritual energy within that object remains trapped, and the operator is weighed down by unrefined capital. The prophet Jeremiah uses a specific metaphor to illustrate this operational failure. He states they have committed two evils. Ozvu makor ma'im chaim lachzev lehem boirois nishborim. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, to hew for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns. Consider this from a structural perspective. A fountain of living waters is a system that naturally flows. It moves. It serves a function and it is directed outward and upward. It is a dynamic circuit where divine blessing can continually enter. On the other hand, a broken cistern is a stagnant, isolated holding tank. It represents an operator who holds physical whelps, traps it within the neutral shell, and refuses to deploy it upwards. Because the system is closed and there is no elevation, the pressure of the environment eventually cracks the container. The neutral asset cannot sustain itself without a flow. The structure fails, and the accumulated wealth dissipates. We observe this mechanic regularly in the corporate sector, and we see this play out exactly the same way in our personal lives as well. We see intelligent individuals build successful corporate structures and build beautiful, resourced homes. They acquire capital, market share, social influence, and luxury. They are surrounded and embedded by the highest grade of the neutral shell. Yet, they lack a higher vision. They do not allocate those resources or the comfort of their private space to build anything of lasting or spiritual value. Their primary objective, whether in the boardroom or in the dining room, is simply to construct a larger cistern. They focus entirely on accumulation. Gradually, the gravity of that unrefined wealth alters their operations and destroys their personal relationships. Their behavior shifts. Their negotiations become hostile. And their patience with their own family vanishes. The asset, rather than serving the operator, begins to dictate their schedule and isolate them from their community. They become trapped managing their own quote-unquote broken cisterns at work and at home. When we evaluate operations of a complex business, and when we look at the daily routine of our personal households, we must apply this exact judgment. We must analyze our balance sheet, our domestic habits, and our core motivations. Are we operating within the clear intention of elevating energy and life for a higher purpose? When you sit at a negotiating table, or when you sit on your sofa after a long day, You are dealing directly with the neutral layer. The capital, the contract terms, the leverage, or simply the digital devices and the entertainment in your house, all of it is indifferent material. It requires a human being to provide direction. If your objective is to solely dominate the opposing party, or to simply detach and consume mindless entertainment in isolation, you will fail to elevate your state of mind. You take a neutral opportunity and you pull it down instead of elevating it. However, if you approach the negotiation and the management of your personal home with the recognition that you are building a vessel for a higher agenda, you take dense material of the neutral shell and you permanently elevate that specific sector of your business and the atmosphere of your living room. The system demands active engagement. You are deployed into a specific business environment, much like the 42 journeys in the wilderness. Your responsibility is to take that resistant physical capital and your private domestic resources and direct them to serve a transcendent purpose. So here's our real-world challenge. This is how we bring the heavens down to earth for this week. Review your current professional portfolio and your personal household routines, and then identify one physical asset that you are treating as a completely neutral. It could be a sum of capital sitting idle in an account, a commercial property that is underutilized, a perhaps specific room in your house, or a specific block of time in your weekly schedule. This week, your physical application of Tikkun Hamidot, of rectification of character traits, is to actively perform an elevation of that exact asset. Of that asset, room, and dedicated time. You must take those resources, break its neutral pattern, and decisively allocate it toward a productive, holy action. Fund a community initiative. Use a property to facilitate a positive outcome. Open your home to guests on Shabbat for a Shabbat meal, or dedicate that schedule block to rigorous Torah study. Let that neutral shell release its latent spiritual energy and to be uplifted to serve a higher purpose. If the concept we explore regarding the intermediate shell, the Klipat Noga, and the mechanics of separation were a clear illustration of how we elevate physical wealth, wait until next week when we unveil the secrets of spiritual vision and the architecture of the eyes in the Haftarah for Parshat Devarim. I hope you enjoyed this lesson and tune in for more next week, Bezrat Hashem, with God's will. Thank you very, very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Thank you. For now, I want to wish you all the very best, good blessings, a beautiful home, and a very, very successful business, a good business atmosphere, and lots of blessing. Thank you for joining me, and I shall see you soon. All the very best. Thank you.